Alright everybody, this is the rundown of variables and boxes. Now I've already built this project, mostly so the video isn't 30 minutes long. So pretty much to start this, what you're going to need to do is make a new project. Just go up to File at the top and just make a new project. Now I think the one from I'm using a newer version, yours may be a little different, but very, very important. I know the ones at school tend to start with C#. You want to make sure that it is Visual Basic that you're going to use when you create this, and it's a Windows format. So it's going to look a little different on the older version if you're using 2017. This is 2019, but for the most part, make sure it's Visual Basic, make sure it's Windows format. And I call this essentially, I think, what did I call it? Variables and boxes. But you can pretty much call it whatever you want. Now, once you get in here and make your project ready to go, here's what you're going to have to do. And I'll run through this a bit at a time, and those watching are welcome to pause whenever they need to name something or get anything situated. So you're going to have a grand total of 6 on the left side, labels, and this is going to be the text that they display. And then you'll have 6 boxes, and I'll run through the names of those here momentarily. And then you'll have 6 more labels, and at the start these are just going to have the information about the particular variable we're going to deal with, and a button that I just made the text click. So what we're going to do with this is essentially talk about how data is stored, how it's pulled from these boxes and put into storage areas, pulled out, put into other items such as labels and stuff. So essentially what's going to happen is we'll put in some information in the box, click the link, it will transfer that information into a variable, a storage area basically. And from there we can change it, we can do some stuff to it, and then we'll pull it from that area and put it into these labels. So whatever we write here will end up filtering out to here, assuming it is the correct type. So as far as names go, and again you can pause as you need. Let's see, perhaps a little bit of a magnification would probably help here. There we go. Alright, so for my string, I'll just go down the labels first. You can see what the text is just by seeing on the screen. But the name of this, from what I called it anyway, is right here. Well, I'm going to have to go a little bit more over. Let's try it. Ha. There we go. LBL string. Pretty simple. This is LBL string. And I'm sure you can probably guess the next one is LBL integer. There we go. LBL integer. The double, LBL double. So you'll see there's kind of a theme here. LBL Boolean, LBL character, and LBL date. So that's the names of those. So remember, the text is what's displayed, the name is what we basically use when we're coding and calling it. It's not super important, I guess, for this, because we're not really using it for more than just a display. But naming everything makes it a lot easier to find. Labels generally start with LBL. Text boxes start with TXT. So text box. That way whenever we're trying to get information from it, we can type in TXT and see all the text boxes listed there. LBL and see all the labels listed there. It just makes it easier to find things. Instead of naming it label 1, label 2, label 3, which makes it incredibly difficult to figure out what's what. You always want to make sure you name things properly. So my string box is, guess what? Text string. My integer? Text integer. And again, you can pause as you're changing the name. Text double. The Boolean is text Boolean. text character, and text date. Pretty straightforward. Now my labels over here, to the right, I have label string result. And if you wanted to short that to R, that's fine. Label string R. But I just put the whole thing in there. And guess what? This would be label integer result. Label double result. Boolean result. Label character result. And label date result. And honestly, I find when you're naming these things, or changing the text or whatever, it's honestly easier just to do one attribute at a time. So we have the name, I click here, I click the next one, it's still pointing to the name. So it's just easier for me to just click down and make these changes in one swoop as I go down. Like this. Because it doesn't move, typically. If you go up and I'm going to change the text, then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to change the name, it's going to take you a lot longer than if you just do these one at a time. Change all the text. Change all the names to whatever it needs to be. So Boolean, character result, and date result. And the button, BTN, click. And of course the text is click. So once you have this built, we can actually worry about the actual code. This won't do anything without some code. So for the code, we're just going to double click on this button here, and it's going to open up our code, which should look a little bit like this. Now, I'm going to define a couple of variables. There's name. The DIM is just basically saying we're making a storage place. It's going to be called name, and this name is going to be a string. This number is going to be an integer, a double, a boolean, a character, and a date. And if you remember, I actually put a little information here. And I did this on purpose so you can kind of know what goes where. But text can contain letters, numbers, symbols. It usually has quotation marks around it. Whole numbers are integers, 1, 2, 3, negative 1, 2, 3. And generally that can go all the way up to like 2.1 blah 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 billion. A double, well, it can have whole numbers, but it mostly has decimal places. There's also a single and a float. There's other data types. Single uses slightly less decimal places than your double. I think it's like half as many. A double uses twice as much. As far as the size of a double, it's big. If I look it up, basically Google just says it's like 4 to the something something e to the 308 or something. So it's kind of hard for me to represent that as a number you can physically see, but it's a big number. Now generally I use doubles for anything decimal related. So currency, money. You could use single too, or a couple of other different types of values, but you know, the only time we'd really worry about that is if we had thousands, millions of different variables that we need to keep track of and we're worried about space. We're not. We're only going to have a handful at any given time, so it's really not going to affect our program much at all. So these are the ones we typically will use the most. So double just holds numbers, but also decimal places. Boolean is true or false. You could also use 0 or 1 to represent true or false as well. Now this is used for if this is true, do this. If this is false, do that. A good example would be, you know, if you have a key in your pocket and you go to the door, well, you have a key, that's true, the door opens. You don't have a key, well, that check is false, the door doesn't open. Or if certain events have occurred in a program or game. If you talk to a certain person, has a certain thing happened. Well, if that is the case, then other things open up or happen. Now, a character is simply a letter. And it could be A, it could be 4, it could be a symbol, but it's just one character. Whereas a string can be like a whole sentence. I think it goes up to 2-point-something billion characters. No one's really going to write 2-point-something billion characters because, generally speaking, a book, like I would say, like a normal book is probably at best 500,000 characters. So 2 billion characters would be an entire library of books. So, but, you know, sentences and words and stuff usually get stored in strings. Whereas character, a single letter, a single thing. Date, of course, is the date on a calendar. You know, January 1st, 1970. And that lets you store dates into that field. So that's roughly it. We'll look at the code one more time over here so we can get it situated. And like I said, there are others. There's long, there's which is big, giant. I think it goes up to 9 quintillion as far as numbers go. And that's used for just ginormous numbers. We probably won't really need that, but it can be used. And there's a couple dozen others if you want to look up different variables in Java, or not Java, but VB. But these are the ones we typically tend to use more than the others. Now, once we define our variables, which I've got right here, I've got a double, which I just called big number. I've got check, which is a Boolean. Letter for it's going to be a character, and today is just going to be a date. Now the as defines what kind of variable it is. This right here is just the name of it, and that can really be anything I want it to be. Dim basically tells Visual Basic that this is a variable. Reserve some storage space for this under this name, and it's going to be this type. So we just define the variables first, and then we can do stuff with them. Now, if I want to take stuff from my text box and plug it in, well, the text string, the .text attribute here, gets whatever's in that text box. And I'm going to plug it into this variable. Now, that doesn't really do much for us right now, but it does move it, store it. I could use it for later. I could pull it, put it in somewhere else. So if the text box changes, I could still have it in this variable and pull it for stuff. So for now, we're just going to take it from that variable and plug it into the result label to the right that says, you know, this holds entire words and sentences and stuff. That'll change to whatever we type in. Now my integer, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to take my number, and I'm going to take whatever's in that box from the text box and plug it into there. And just to show you what you can do, I'm going to add 100 to that variable and then print it in that label. Just put it in that label over there. So we'll make an actual change. And I'll put it in the label, and you should see whatever I type in gets 100 added to it, and it should appear to the right. The big number, or double, same thing, is text double. I take the text, plug it in there, and then I just spit it out in the label to the right. Boolean, same thing. Text for the letter, same exact thing. I'm just going to take that one character, plug it in the variable, and then spit it back out. And the date, also the same. So this allows us to store these things, pull them out. So hopefully this lets you see how you can read from these boxes, write to them if I wanted to. If I wanted to write to the text box, I would, you know, say text string.text equals whatever I want to write to it. And it would put it in there. This allows me to put stuff in that text, or get stuff from the text. So hopefully you realize how to assign labels and text boxes and other things right now. Even buttons, I could still do that. So let's see how this looks in practice. I'll go and run this. There we go. So we've got it up and running. And I'm simply going to go in here and I'm going to type in a string. My zoom seems to be focused there. Alright, there we go. I'll type in a number. Type in a double, which is anything with decimal places really, but you could put a whole number in that. True. A character, A. A date, okay. 09/01/2021. And as soon as I hit click, it should dump these into variables. My 12 will get 100 added to it, and I should end up with 112. And then it's going to put them all in these little labels to the right. So fuzzy pickles, 112, and my other little variables and stuff. So now I've stored them in variables. I can change them, as you can see here. I have taken them from those variables and plugged them into labels. And I could plug them into text boxes or other things too if I needed to. So that hopefully gives you a rough idea of how that works. Now, there are some issues with what we've written. And one of those issues would be, let's say I go over here, in my string and I type in 1, 2, 3. Is that a string? The answer is yes. Anything can be a string. From this to, question mark, anything in there is a string. But an integer, though, if I were to type in 10.0, that is actually a double, not an integer. And as soon as I hit click, let's see if it did it. Oh, well, it may have downgraded it. But definitely, if I type in Bob, that is not a number. And I've crashed. Lo and behold, we've crashed. So I have to, there's a stop button just above probably where you can see, but I can stop it, start it over again. So if I plug the wrong thing in, and of course Booleans can also be 0 and 1. Let's just plug in a couple of things here. Character, date, 01/02/2021, let's just say. Hit the button. There you go. So a 0 is false, a 1 is true. But if I type in Bob, it will crash because that's not a Boolean. If I go here and try to type in 15, well, that's not a single character, it will crash. And I'm sure there's probably a couple ways we can crash date to Bob. I'm pretty sure that's not a date. Lo and behold, it's not. It even highlights and says, yeah, this messed up. So one of the negatives of what we got so far is if you type in the wrong thing, it will crash. Now, there are ways to fix that. We haven't learned those yet. Once we get to conditional statements, learn how to check before we start plugging things in. Is it an integer? Is it a double? Is it what it's supposed to be? We check that, and then we can plug it in after the fact. Or maybe post up a little error message saying, yeah, that's not right, try again. Surely you filled out a form online that essentially just, you typed it in and a little red text pops up saying you didn't do it right, try again. Essentially, it's that. So again, this is variables and boxes. We've got our variables, or our boxes rather, and then we've got our variables and code that controls where that information goes, how it's saved, and how we edit, change it, and throw it back out. Alright, that is essentially it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But that's a basic rundown of how to edit text boxes and labels and store them in variables for later. Alright, till next time.